Hello, and welcome to my presentation entitled Repairing Jacob's Ladder, Healing REM Sleep and Dreams. I'm Dr. Rubin Naiman. I'm a clinical psychologist and for the past 20 years have been the sleep and dream specialist at the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine at the University of Arizona. I also have a background in dream work, in Jungian and archetypal dream work, and have come to see dreaming essentially as nature's endogenous psychedelic. And my focus today is about a growing concern I've had around a silent epidemic of REM sleep loss. So let's begin with an overview. I want to emphasize something I think we all know, and that's how critical sleep and dreaming are to our lives. Sleep and dreams are essentially the roots of the tree of life. Just as when we look at a tree, we frequently fail to recognize how much of it is subterranean, how much of it is out of view. And I think this is as true for consciousness. We recognize waking, but fail to recognize the depth and importance of what is underground of sleep and dreams. The roots of sleep and dreams not only ground us in the earth of our lives, but they also are channels for the delivery of nutrients, as well as a network that allows us to communicate at this collective unconscious level with other life. So we will talk about newly emerging perspectives on REM sleep and dreaming, what I consider a triangulation of research that brings together our understanding of REM sleep and our understanding of dreaming, and why this is so important. We will look at the problem I've mentioned, which is a silent epidemic of REM sleep and dream loss. The ramifications or consequences of the problem, which include compromised health, mental health, and a really serious constriction of consciousness, of both personal and collective consciousness. And then we'll take a look at the causes of these problems, which include medicalization, the medicalization of REM sleep and dreams, something I call Wake-centrism, which is an inherent bias in the way we look at life, an inherent bias in consciousness. And then I'll emphasize what I'm calling Anirophobia, which is a fear, I think a very common and unconscious fear of dreams and dreaming, as well as a fear of the unconscious. And then we'll finish up with a discussion of solutions, so what I'm referring to as dream hygiene. I see this as an essential missing complement to sleep hygiene. I think this is really the missing piece in sleep medicine today. We'll talk about how critical it is and essential ways of restoring REM sleep and dream work. Jacob's Ladder. So let's begin with this wonderful quote from Marie-Louise von Franz in her book, The Way of the Dream. She says the ladder symbolized the continuous, constant connection with the divine powers of the unconscious. We could say the dream itself was such a ladder. It connects us with the unknown depth of our psyche. Every dream is a rung on a ladder. We probably all recall the story of Jacob's Ladder, the biblical story in Genesis, where Jacob is escaping his brother whom he had betrayed. He beds down for the night and uses a stone as a pillow and falls into a dream. And in this dream, he experiences a ladder stretching from the earth into the sky. And there are angels ascending and descending, climbing up and down the ladder. And then he steps into a conversation with the divine. So the dream is a beautiful representation of what I think of as a connection between a rock and a soft place, different forms of consciousness. It connects the material and the ethereal world. It connects consciousness and the unconscious, earth and heaven, the world of waking and the world of sleep and dreams. So I think we can look at the image of the ladder itself as an archetypal structure representing REM sleep. It's a network that allows us a certain kind of movement and communication. And if the ladder is REM sleep, we can look at the angels. Of course, the term angel comes from the Greek and Hebrew words for messenger. We can look at the angels ascending and descending the ladder as representation as representing dreaming, the communication, the connection between the two worlds. And I will make the point that this ladder is broken. So, what is REM dreaming and why is it so important? Essentially, dreaming is an out-of-body experience. The waking mind, which is ordinarily shaped, framed, and operating through the body in terms of its sensory input and motor output, is now liberated from that. But more fundamentally, dreaming is an experiential digestive process. In recent years, we've come to think of the gut as a second brain, primarily because it has to make informed, intelligent decisions about what it will do with all of the foods and fluids we deliver to it, what it will keep and what it will excrete. Likewise, during REM sleep, the brain is a second gut. It processes, it metaphorically chews on, swallows, digests, sifts through, and assimilates waking life experiences. So one of the outcomes of that is it effectively downregulates negative emotion. We have really good data showing that healthy REM sleep functions as an antidepressant. In fact, I think of REM sleep, I think of dreaming as a form of endogenous psychotherapy. It also consolidates procedural memory. In this process of digesting information from the day, it decides what it will hold, what it will keep in memory, and what it will let go of. In this sense, dreaming morphs us. True to the origins of the word Morpheus, the god of dreams, we are essentially remade when we dream. We're updated. So this psychological digestive process is so critical to our personal growth and our mental health. When it doesn't function well, we suffer from what I consider a form of psychological indigestion, perhaps psychological constipation in the form of clinical depression. Very importantly, and too often forgotten, dreaming is also the natural bridge to sleep. And I believe one of the reasons we have so much difficulty with sleeplessness, with insomnia in our world, is we have failed to recognize the critical role of dreaming in our sleep. The bridge from waking to sleep involves dreaming. The bridge from sleep to waking involves dreaming. And there's a lot of REM dreaming that's woven in cyclically through the night. And lastly, and perhaps most fundamentally, I look at dreaming as an exercise. It's a nightly process that stretches consciousness. We might think of this as sort of a psycho-spiritual yoga. Whatever we dream about, being in the dream allows the mind to experience a more open, a fundamentally more receptive posture toward waking life. So we are dreamless. We're in the midst of a silent epidemic of REM sleep loss. It's striking to me that this is silent because there's so many factors, so many features of ordinary waking life, of common lifestyles that significantly, knowingly interfere with, suppress, or sometimes even eliminate REM sleep. I've listed 10 very important factors here, which includes excessive use of alcohol and cannabis, most hypnotic sleeping pills, particularly tricyclic antidepressants and benzodiazepines. Most antidepressants to varying degrees interfere with REM sleep, some of them significantly, some of them less so. We are, from a public health standpoint, and have been in the midst of an anticholinergic burden. Anticholinergics essentially interfere or suppress REM sleep. Artificial light at night, ALAN, suppresses melatonin, which interferes with REM sleep. Obstructive sleep apnea and middle-of-the-night insomnias, as well as disrupted natural rhythms, commonly interfere with REM sleep. And I think behind all of this, there's a dismissive posture toward the dream. You know, it's just a dream. And one of the symptoms of this that concerns me greatly is that dreaming has been devalued in psychotherapy today. So I believe there's evidence, and you can see this in a piece I wrote for the Annals of the New York Academy of Sciences, that we are at least as dream deprived as we are sleep deprived. In fact, I think so much of what we call sleep deprivation turns out to be dream deprivation. Given the critical functions of REM dreaming, it's not a surprise that there's some serious consequences associated with REM dream loss. In summary, these include an increased risk for inflammation, pain, obesity in kids and teens, and more recently we have data showing an increased risk for mortality associated with poor dreaming. Long ago, Carl Jung and his student Elida Evans created a model indicating a belief that there was an increased risk for cancer associated with poor dreaming. Not surprisingly, we see memory deficits, dementia, Alzheimer's disease, and linked to RBD, or REM sleep behavior disorder, we've long known there's an increased risk for Parkinson's disease and other neurological disorders. It also is not a surprise, something we've known for years, is there is a common pattern of damaged dreaming associated with mood disorders, especially depression. In fact, from a psychoanalytic standpoint, we used to refer to depression as a loss of one's dreams, and I believe there's a literal underpinning to that notion. Chronic insomnia is also associated with poor dreaming. What we call wake after sleep onset in sleep medicine may be more accurately referred to as wake after dream onset. What typically wakes us up in the middle of the night tends to be associated with our posture, our reaction, perhaps an unconscious posture toward dreaming. And last but not least, I think one of the most critical consequences of REM dream loss is an erosion of the breadth of consciousness. We begin to live in smaller and smaller worlds. The frame through which we see the world begins to shrink. Ron Lang, R.D. Lang, spoke about the politics of experience, the limitations that are cast upon what we believe are valuable or meaningful experiences in life. And these are also shaped by our attitude towards sleep and dreams. I think this shrinkage of consciousness, if you will, has profound social and political ramifications. Sleep and dreams, which for our entire history were personal, social, and even spiritual experiences, and in recent decades have been transfigured into biomedical processes. So to begin with, we define sleep negatively. And what I mean by that is we define it in terms of what it's not. It's kind of a sleight of hand that leaves us thinking we know what it is when we don't. So for example, both in science and among the public, if you ask people what sleep is, they'll say what it's not. It's not waking. It's not awareness. It's not consciousness. And the technical term for true sleep is non-REM. It's not dreaming. And once again, knowing what something is not doesn't tell us what it is. We also see a limited regard offered for REM dreaming in medicine. It has been recast largely as a biomedical process. It's been referred to as REM sleep. And both this negative definition and this reduced regard for REM dreaming depersonalizes sleep. It basically pushes it out of our reach as people. We can't access sleep because we can't experience it, which, by the way, is not true. There's data showing that we can directly experience even deep sleep. And as importantly, we're basically told by science, directly or indirectly, that dreams are meaningless, that they just result from this incidental dust cloud that's kicked up during nightly neural housekeeping. The reality is, independently of what we believe about the meaning of a dream, they're meaningful. And what I mean by that is when we dream, we experience the dream as being meaningful, and it impacts us. It impacts the body and the psyche as a meaningful experience. So all of this negative definition and particularly limited regard for dreaming is in sharp contrast to the roots of Western medicine. Pictured here, we have Asclepios, the Greek god of healing. And what's interesting in Asclepian traditions and Asclepian healing temples in antiquity, one of the primary forms of medicine that they used was dream work. They paid serious and organized attention to the dream and used it routinely in helping people who were not well. So, wake-centrism. The essence of wake-centrism is captured in this little brief segment from the Three Stooges.
You big lummox. You want to give me birthmarks?
I'm a victim of circumstance.
Lay down.
Move over.
Hey. Wake up and go to sleep.
Yeah, wake up and go to sleep. This is an interesting notion, and it's actually something I've encountered clinically in so many patients who can't sleep, the belief that they have to use waking life to leverage sleep. So this is about wake-centrism. Wake-centrism is a kind of a pre-Copernican state of consciousness. It looks at waking, it presumes waking to be the gold standard, the core, the essence of human consciousness, and sleep and dreams are presumed to be secondary and subservient, that the only reason we need to sleep and the only reason we need to dream is to make us better waking people. In fact, we tend to look at dreaming in that way. We try to harvest our dreams and use the information from the dream to make us better at waking. Essentially, this results in a kind of a relentless, unmodulated form of waking. We value waking over sleep and dreams. We shortchange sleep and dreams, and it results in this runaway kind of waking associated with psychophysiological hyperarousal. I see this as an addiction, a process addiction to waking life. Again, something that we tend to be unaware of. I've mentioned that we try to leverage waking to get to sleep and dreams, and this keeps us stuck in waking. Wake-centrism is not a blind spot. It is an essential loss of peripheral vision. So, Anirophobia is another factor in this epidemic of sleep loss and this damage that's occurring to Jacob's ladder. We devalue dreams. The image here of a magazine called Dream is one that I encountered. I was actually on my way to a meeting of the International Association for the Study of Dreams in Southern California just a few years ago, stopped in a cafe and looked across the room, and I saw this magazine called Dream, and I thought, how wonderful, how synchronous is this? But when I looked more closely at it, it reminded me that the most common reference, or certainly one of the most common references to the dream in modern life, is as real estate. It's a real estate magazine, and the American dream has been reduced to a house. We have a common belief today that good sleep is dreamless sleep, and we tend to look at dreaming as being, again, secondary, subservient, and even kind of crazy. Will Dement, the grandfather of sleep research in the United States, is commonly quoted as having said, "Dreaming permits us to be quietly and safely insane every night of our lives." Well, I think this is a reflection of a deep-rooted misunderstanding of the dream. There's a kind of judgment in calling it insane. We also see growing interest in hacking the dream world. There's a common tendency today. There are a number of companies that are formed, in fact, that are using neurological assessment technology to tap into and hack the dream, similarly to the way that we tend to hack resources in nature. Before we can even understand or certainly have sufficient regard for the dream, we're trying to tap into it and utilize it to make us better in waking life. I mentioned earlier that there's a disinterest in dreaming and psychotherapy. This is really disturbing to me, since the roots of psychotherapy came out of dream work and psychoanalytic traditions. And as I've mentioned earlier, I think we're neurophobic. We view the dream as a message from the unconscious. And, the unconscious has been demonized for a long time. The notion of beating the devil out of actually comes out of old Christian child-rearing textbooks based on the belief that children are born with demonic influence inside of them. Even more recently, the classic Freudian notion of the id, what Freud in German called das Es, the it, suggested that what was at the heart of the personality could not be trusted at best, and at worst, it was a vast repository of repugnant impulses. So the unconscious, the dream, has been diminished, and more so, it has been labeled as being crazy and even dangerous. So Anirophobia is a fear of sleep on the one hand and a fear of dreams on the other. James Hillman captures this in this moving quote where he says, "We need incantations to help us drop off to sleep. We need a ritual of prayer, toothbrushing, and the teddy bear, of masturbation, food cramming, and the late show, of nightcap and sleeping pill. The basic bedtime story of our culture is that to sleep is to dream, and to dream is to enter the house of the Lord of the dead, where our complexes lie in wait. We do not go gentle into that good night." Why do we turn from our dreams? I think they're frightening. We've known for a long time that most dream content, generally speaking, is bad. And of course, this makes sense when we consider that dreaming is part of a digestive process, and digestion isn't necessarily pretty. But we need to learn that dreaming, even bad dreams, are a critical part of good dreaming. Carlos Castaneda captured this when he said, "What dreaming does, it gives us the fluidity to enter into other worlds by destroying our sense of knowing this world. So there's a revelation of another world, as in the old haiku, 'My house burned down, now I can see the full moon.' There's a revelation of a deeper, a richer world around the deconstruction or the destruction of this world. How we manage bad dreams in the night world, in the dream world, is how we manage bad dreams in the waking world. And one of the, I think, most critical expressions of Anirophobia is in what I consider the common misinterpretation of dreams. I think most of what goes on as dream interpretation is not well informed. It is about waking consciousness, wake-centrism dominating the unconscious. Once again, James Hillman wrote, "Dreams can be killed by interpreters. The direct application of the dream as a message for the ego, the waking self, as a message for the ego is probably less effective in actually changing consciousness and affecting life than is the dream still kept alive as an enigmatic image. Better not to impose wake-centric interpretations." On the one hand, so many therapists are now remiss in not addressing dreams. On the other hand, this wake-centric dream approach can actually further disconnect us from the dream. The error in this analysis is reflected in turning an old biblical notion on its head, the notion of as it is above, so is it below. We tend to try to understand the dream, which is above in Jacob's ladder metaphor, by comparing it to images from below, from the waking world. I would say in this regard that I've come to believe that knowing that dreaming is meaningful is significantly more important than knowing the particular meaning of any dream. So we close with a recommendation for a solution. I think we need to begin talking to sleep patients and the public in terms of sleep health around this concept of dream hygiene. Dreaming has become a stepchild in sleep medicine. So to dream well, of course, we need to sleep well. To dream well, we need to manage REM suppressive agents. We can benefit, I think, greatly by the informed use of melatonin. So much of melatonin use today is not based on intelligent information. There are so many ways we can potentiate the dream in healthy ways with supplements. See the website Erowid for this. I think practicing mindful morning awakenings is a critical part of sleep hygiene, waking up slowly and not being drawn out of bed by an alarm clock. I think beginning a practice of keeping a dream and a waking dream journal, engaging in some form of intelligent dream work, which doesn't reduce the dream to a reflection of waking life, practicing what I call the use of dream eyes, the way we perceive in the dream at night, intentionally by day. I think this is something those of us who are artistically inclined do naturally. Establishing a dialogue with shadow, which involves dealing with the dark, bad dream aspects of the night. And I think very critically, joining a community dream circle. The International Association for the Study of Dreams now offers options for this. And I want to finish by also highlighting the need for clinical and public health changes to address the epidemic of sleep loss. This is basically how to repair Jacob's ladder from a public health standpoint. I think we need, particularly clinicians, need to screen for signs of REM sleep loss, looking at sleep, mood, and neurological disorders. And also we need to screen for REM suppressant medication use and address this. I think we need to emphasize and offer a lot of training around dream work as it is indicated, which I think it is often indicated in both medical healthcare and psychiatric healthcare. And I would emphasize, I think we need a new diagnostic classification, something along the lines of REM dream deficiency disorder. We need to highlight this, we need to designate it, we need to diagnose it so that we address it clinically. And I also think we need to add dream health. We need to piggyback dream health concerns onto current public sleep health initiatives. So let me finish rather with a brief story about Einstein, who was asked by a newspaper reporter what he believed was the single most important question in life, thinking he would say something about gravity or the speed of life. But Einstein said the most important question is the universe friendly? And I think this question is very relevant regarding our relationship to the dream world. Is the unconscious friendly? So dreaming essentially reveals a greater order behind all things. But will we trust it? Thank you very much.
This is J.F. Pagel, talking from COVID-free Atlantic Canada about parasomnia dreams, other forms of sleep-associated consciousness. Sleep is considered a state of consciousness because of the presence of dreaming, or dreaming, which we generally define as mentation occurring in sleep, though there's other definitions. From a research perspective, we tend to focus on mentation in sleep. Such dreaming is reported from all of the polysomnography-defined sleep stages. Polysomnography is a sleep science pattern in which we use multiple recording systems, primarily EEG, to record sleep. And we have well-defined sleep stages. Stage 1, sleep onset, defined electrophysiologically by diminished alpha and slow-rolling eye movements on EOG. Light sleep, which has spindles at sigma frequency, 15 cycles per second, NK complexes, and deep sleep, which is defined by a screen that is predominantly 1 cycle per second delta. REM sleep, which is classically associated with dreaming, is associated with rapid eye movements in a conjugate pattern, generally alpha and beta frequency. It's very wake-like, and EMG suppression. What we're looking at as far as states of consciousness associated with these various sleep stages are the parasomnias, which are generally classified based on their sleep-associated sleep stage associations. Parasomnias are defined as undesired and disruptive sleep disorders inducing arousals. These are sometimes associated with strange and unusual behaviors. The ones associated with sleep onset are stage 1. The parasomnias include sleep starts, sleep paralysis, and hypnagogic hallucinations. The parasomnias of stage 2, these are the sleep talking and panic attacks. I'm looking at parasomnias primarily associated with reported dreaming, though there are some parasomnias that have either not been studied for dream association or have limited dream association. Stage 3, deep sleep, the parasomnias are somnambulism or sleepwalking, night terrors, and confusional arousals. In REM sleep, parasomnia is described the extreme of that state. Nightmares or nightmare disorder, sleep paralysis, also seen in stage 1, and REM behavior disorder. Parasomnia-associated dream mentation is commonly experienced. We get 80% dream mentation recall from the parasomnias associated with REM sleep and those associated with sleep onset, stage 1. In stages 2 and in deep sleep stage 3, we get a lower frequency of reported dreaming at around 40%, but we clearly get a large proportion of parasomnias with dream mentation from these other stages. Particularly in these stages, much of what we know about sleep consciousness, particularly the phenomenology of sleep consciousness, comes from the dream reports that we obtain from people awakening during parasomnia experiences. In the field of sleep medicine, parasomnias are well described. They're well described and they have diagnostic codes, and they can be followed closely, and you can figure out who has a parasomnia based on meeting criteria. Most parasomnias don't reflect underlying medical or psychiatric disease, particularly those seen in childhood. It also should be noted that parasomnia-associated mentation is quite different from that we get from other alternative forms of consciousness. The mentation that individuals will report from different sleep stages rarely reflects what we see from psychoactive drugs or meditation. Now, parasomnia dreams share from one sleep stage, share characteristics with other parasomnias in those sleep stages. And it's not just phenomenology they share, they also share, based on that sleep stage association, the electrophysiology, the neuroanatomy, the neurochemistry, and the neurophysiology that underlies each sleep stage. We know a lot about each of the sleep stages, far more than we know about the quote-unquote dream association with the physiology. We know the sleep stage association with the physiology. What I'm going to present today, at least initially, is an overview of the formal characteristics, bizarreness, and types of thought processing, forms of phenomenology that can be compared between the different sleep stages and can be used to develop and describe the typical dream mentation that's reported from each of these stages of consciousness. We'll start with stage 1. Sleep onset is a very interesting and rarely studied form of dreaming, except perhaps in patients with narcolepsy who are being evaluated and questioned about the onset of hypnagogic hallucinations. What I'm going to do with each of these sleep stages is discuss the formal characteristics. If any of you are further interested in this, there is a major book coming out. It includes 15 different authors from 8 different countries, leaders of the dream science field, discussing the various forms of parasomnia dreaming. It's called Parasomnia Dreaming, misspelled in this presentation, exploring other forms of sleep consciousness. It's just come out this month. The formal characteristics of sleep onset dreams are they're primarily visual. There are neuroanatomic studies and EEG studies showing persistent visual activation during sleep onset that is not found in the other stages of sleep. These tend to be coherent dream stories with high recall. The recall rate from sleep onset is in the range of 80%. There's potential lucidity. Classically, lucid dreams have been associated with REM, so there's been limited study with sleep stage associated with lucidity, but LaBerge's initial studies showed that 17% of dreams characterized as lucid came from sleep onset. The typical content of sleep starts has been the impression of falling. There can be intense anxiety, emotion associated with PTSD on sleep onset nightmares and sleep paralysis. And these can be very nightmare reality based associated, particularly in patients with PTSD. Now, the other characteristic, content characteristic that's applied to many dreams is bizarreness. I'd like to point out that there are two primary scales of bizarreness. Hobson's scale was designed from literature based on a narrative analysis, which looks at discontinuities, incongruities, and uncertainties and rates the occurrence of these events in the dream report. This scale typically shows that REM sleep is the most bizarre of all sleep stages. However, it's based on narrative reports, and perhaps the only clear characteristics we can ascribe to REM's dreaming is the increased length of report. Harry Hunt, at about the same time, developed a scale that included the behavioral and emotional personification and thought associated with the dream report, not limiting it just to the narrative. Based on the Hobson scale, sleep onset is intermediate to low in its degree of bizarreness. Based on the Hunt scale, with the hallucinations, the clouding and confusion, and the high emotions, sleep onset dreams tend to be quite bizarre. If you would think that the classically described sleep onset dream of a succubus sucking the soul from the dreamer, really bizarre, but it would meet low criteria based on Hobson. Rational thought processing is another way to looking at dreaming. This is a developing area. Most of it is based on Woolman and Kosmova's study that they've continued to build on this, of rating thought processing in dream reports in different areas. Sleep onset tends to have high perceptual time awareness and to be very emotional and as well as subjective, low in other areas. Stage 2, what some call the junkyard of sleep, is about 70% of our sleep, and it's been studied basically comparatively to REM dreams. Some authors have come up with the idea that stage 2 dreaming is not really dreaming, it's mentation occurring in sleep, because it's not sometimes quite as interesting as the dreams we'll get from other stages. The formal characteristics of dreaming in stage 2, it tends to be day reflective and has variable recall across the night. However, stage 2, particularly stage 2 panic attacks, those brief moments of terror, can have extreme emotion and anxiety. From a Hobson standpoint, these are generally low-grade the bizarreness is low of grade in this stage. It's also low according to the Hunt scale. Rational thought processing is also quite low. Though there is moderate perceptual integration, particularly with K complexes, it is easy to arouse out of this stage. REMS dreams are what we have considered for the past 50 years as the primary dreams we study. In fact, there's many who have come to view REMS and dreaming as being the same thing. However, it's quite clear that dreaming occurs in the other stages and that REMS dreams have a typical pattern that's different from the dreams reported from other stages. They tend to be coherent with detailed plot and character development. They tend to have high recall, just like sleep onset dreams. They have a long report and can have disturbing intense emotion, especially those REMS dreams associated with the parasomnias of nightmares and sleep paralysis. Lucidity has classically been associated with REMS dreaming, though, as noted, lucidity occurs in a range, and it's sometimes poorly defined. Lucidity can be anything from the awareness of being present in a dream to the extreme of sleep offset and control of the dreams to be able to push a button or to make a voluntary eye movement. It's somewhat unclear as to whether these forms of lucidity are the same thing. It's also somewhat unclear when someone can actually make a waking move, such as a controlled operational event leading to sleep offset, that this is REM sleep. Also, in REMS is the classic place for nightmares that are very real appearing, except of course in individuals that have PTSD. The bizarreness of REMS dreams, Hobson's scale based on length of report and narrative pattern, is that these are quite bizarre events. According to Hunt, however, hallucinations are low, confusion is low. There is uncanny emotion with nightmares, but it's not typical of dreams. At least from a bizarreness standpoint based on the Hunt scale, REMS dreams are kind of boring. Rational thought processing is quite high in REMS, which may reflect its pattern of EEG activity, its pattern of neuroanatomical activation, all being much more like waking findings than the other forms of sleep and dreaming. Now, I find the most interesting dreams to come from deep sleep, though I know there are those, in fact, I've heard it reported or presented at Towards the Science of Consciousness meeting by others that deep sleep or stage 3 is dreamless sleep. In fact, this pattern of belief has just for years gone against the evidence. So you'll still find textbooks saying that no one reports dreaming from deep sleep parasomnias. However, it's clear that any study who's looked at it finds dream reports in at least 40% of cases. The specific parasomnia, sleepwalking, associated with autonomic and inappropriate behaviors, is associated generally with content of escape from a perceived threat. It has extreme emotions, sometimes fragmentary recall, doesn't tend to be a long dream report. Confusional arousals are associated with mental confusion and disorientational arousals, sometimes inappropriate and violent behaviors, once again, short reports. Night terrors, incoherent vocalizations, extreme fear, autonomic discharge, confusion and disorientation, and again, fragmentary recall. All of these parasomnias are more common in children. Based on a Hobson scale, these dreams have low discontinuities, low incongruities, and high uncertainties. That is, they're very vague sometimes. On a Hunt scale, there's some areas of clouding, confusion, emotion, and bizarre personification that makes these extremely bizarre dreams. The rational thought processing occurring in deep sleep dreams tends to be low. The formal characteristics, mental confusion and disorientational arousal, fragmentary recall, autonomic and inappropriate behaviors, and frantic attempts to escape a perceived threat. Those are your typical deep sleep dreams. Now, this is just a short overview. As noted, there's a full book coming out addressing parasomnia dreaming for those who are interested, and it seems quite clear that the different stages of sleep have different forms of consciousness based on different phenomenology that reflects different electrophysiology, different neuroanatomy, and different neurochemistry. I'd like to ask those of you watching this presentation to think about your dreams, and realize that you have multiple kinds of dreams based on the sleep stage from which they occur. If you look at the phenomenology, those of you who meditate or go through a cognitive approach to falling asleep may or often will have sleep onset dreams, sometimes even hallucination. It's noted that hypnagogic hallucinations are reported by almost half of people in population descriptions. We all have stage 2 dreams, kind of boring day repetitive dreams. And for those of us who might sometimes have panic attacks, that extreme level of panic and terror is often a stage 2 dream. Stage 3 dreams, many of us had deep sleep dreams, had night terrors, have had those short, intensely uncomfortable dreams that wake us up, may be repetitive. These dreams can be intense, and many of the people, the artists I work with in dream utilization, often will work from deep sleep dreams as well as REM dreams. REM dreams are shared by all of us. Almost everyone has REM dreams. We all clearly have REM sleep. Non-dreamers are rare. REM dreams, classically, the parasomnia dreams reflect the extremes of the state. The behavioral extremes, which include paralysis, extreme nightmares, and the acting out of dreams that those of us who are somewhat older males may have as we grow older. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Paul Callis, and I am an astronomer at the University of California, Berkeley. Behind me is an artist's illustration of a planetary system that I discovered with the Hubble Space Telescope around a nearby star called Fomalhaut. And in fact, Fomalhaut is a key part of my talk today, where I will summarize my evidence that during dreaming, we perceive snippets of our autobiographical future, which of course has implications for the nature of consciousness and many other things that I will summarize in my talk today. Perhaps the first puzzling question is, why would an astronomer be interested in precognitive dreams? Well, the answer is simple. I had one when I was 13 years old, and in fact, the age of onset for precognitive dreams for many people is typically in the pre or early teen years. I call this the Haycart dream, where I dreamt of a person who was injured and another person asked them how it happened, and they say jumping from a haycart to a 16-wheeler. And that was the last dream I had before waking up in the morning. And when I woke up, I spent quite some time puzzling over this phrase because it was very strange and unusual and novel. And clearly, a haycart and a large truck aren't usually in the same place or in the same story. But then a few months later in my gym class, a boy walks in with injuries to his knee. A girl asks him what happened, and he says the exact same thing, jumping from a haycart to a 16-wheeler. I immediately and very clearly remembered this phrase from my dream a few months earlier. These types of experiences are often called déjà vu, which means previously seen in French. Psychologists have been studying déjà vu for over a century, and several comprehensive books actually exist. Déjà vu can be defined as the feeling that a present-day experience is familiar, as if experienced in an undefined past time. However, the Descartes dream that I had just described is not déjà vu because the words feeling and undefined are incorrect. Instead, a more accurate French phrase is déjà rêvé, which means previously dreamed. Here, the person recognizes that a present-day experience is a memory of a past dream. It's not just a feeling, and the memory isn't undefined. The most important word is recognize, which means you are retrieving a memory and you know exactly why you have that memory. The phrase I like to use is the onironaut phenomena, which is kind of hard to pronounce, but oniro means dream in Greek, and naut means traveler. So the onironaut phenomena specifically indicates a process of information time travel that emerges during dreaming. Dreaming becomes a vehicle for information time travel. The occurrence rates of déjà vu or déjà rêvé have been studied by psychologists. In this paper on the left, roughly a third of 20 to 30-year-olds surveyed reported precognitive dreams or déjà rêvé occurring 2 to 4 times a year. And on the right is a different study that shows the frequency of reported déjà vu peaks in the young adult years and then starts to decline with age. The takeaway point is that the majority of people in their late teens or 20s have had a few experiences of déjà vu or déjà rêvé. Of course, the logical problem with precognition is that events that will occur in the future do not exist in the present day. It just doesn't make sense to measure or perceive something that does not exist. So we have to look at alternate explanations. Indeed, in the psychology literature, there are at least 20 hypotheses for explaining the experience of déjà vu that do not have anything to do with time travel. For example, medical research shows that individuals with temporal lobe epilepsy experience an illusion of déjà vu, and that clearly arises from a health problem. But what about healthy individuals? Well, broadly speaking, déjà rêvé relies on memories, and all memories are reconstructions where mistakes are possible. You may fabricate a memory. What you think was a real event in the past, such as a dream, is actually an imagined event about a dream, or the dream memory may be real, yet flawed. You may remember that the dream corresponds perfectly to an event that just happened, but in fact, only some parts of the dream have a vague correspondence to the actual events. Pure chance is also a possibility. For example, people worry about the deaths of loved ones and have dreams about this all the time. And then many people die every day, and a coincidence in time is bound to happen. But because precognition and time travel is such an amazing concept, something called confirmation bias kicks in, and we will believe the events that are evidence for time travel, and then we'll ignore all the other dreams that never came true. Another problem could be the misinterpretation of thinking about or anticipating the future. Thinking about the future comes to life in dreams as a virtual audiovisual world, and then this can match the real world in the future that you had naturally anticipated. Another possibility is the self-fulfilling prophecy. Dreams are a source of inspiration, and you may choose to do something in the future based on a dream, yet there was no precognition involved. So how does the Descartes dream stack up to these alternate explanations? Well, first, I'm not an epileptic, so we can rule out temporal lobe epilepsy. How about flawed memories? In this case, the dream occurred right before waking, and I remembered the phrase very clearly, and I thought about it. So the memory is very distinct. Plus, the dream has specific words in a specific order that is extremely unusual. This is not a general description of something common like a boy jumped into the swimming pool. Instead, the phrase is analogous to a difficult to guess computer password, for example. Indeed, I checked Google to see if this phrase exists somewhere, and I didn't find anything. How about pure chance? Again, the event involves a specific sequence of words, like creating a complex password. So it's very unlikely that I would be able to dream about this specific sequence of words. Anticipation does not work because the boy's injury was a new event, and it would be impossible for me to guess the unexpected phrase that the boy invented. And finally, the self-fulfilling prophecy is not relevant in this case. So my conclusion is that the Descartes dream was a precognitive dream. One uncertainty is whether or not a third party created the unusual phrase, and both the boy and I heard it or read it, and I simply forgot about this happening. However, I actually think the phrase originated from the creative mind of this young boy, and it was a genuine precognitive dream, because it's such an unusual phrase that it doesn't seem to exist in otherwise. In this chart, I show the number of similar precognitive experiences I recorded between 1981 and 2016. So this evidence simply comes from two different diaries. One is a dream diary, and then the other is a déjà rêvé diary, where I write things down when something triggers a memory of a past dream. Next one checks if the events in the déjà rêvé diary are found in the dream diary, and part of this process is to be skeptical, like I just demonstrated, and to check if something you think is a precognitive dream experience is actually one of the illusions that I just described. So you can see there's a sharp spike in my déjà rêvé experiences in 2009, and there's a reason for that. In 2009, I became convinced that my experiences were genuine information time travel rather than an illusion of the mind, because of Fomalhaut. So let's come back full circle to Fomalhaut, which was that astronomical discovery that convinced me precognition happens during dreaming. What the reader sees here is a ring-like nebulosity around a star that is being blocked behind the dark central region. We don't see the star at all, because what we want to do is study the dust produced by comets and asteroids orbiting the star. But this dust is very faint, so we have to block the star. So this elliptical shape here is actually a huge collection of dust orbiting the star. But when you look at my image of Fomalhaut in the New York Times here, you are not viewing what I actually saw for the first time. The image is actually highly processed after many observations with the Hubble Space Telescope over many years. So what I want to show you is how I experienced the discovery for the first time, when the discovery was genuinely novel to my eyes. So here is an email where I'm describing the discovery on November 1st, 2004 to my collaborators, and I'm telling them what I just discovered. Here is a quote from my message. The first robust science result is that the ring is not centered with respect to the star. This means that when I look at the geometry of the ring of dust surrounding the star should be at the center of the dust ring. But the big surprise is finding that the star is not at the center of the ring. The star is offset to the upper right of center. To illustrate my discovery, in the image below, I drew those concentric annuli that trace the ring-like nebulosity. So if you take a closer look, you will note that the star is behind the central black region, but the star is not at the center of the ellipse. So all of this occurred in 2004. And at the time, I seem to recall that I had a dream about something like this. And the years went by until in 2008, I checked my old dream journals. And lo and behold, here is what I found. An entry from November 11th, 1995, where I drew an elliptical ring around a star, and the geometric center of the elliptical ring is located to the lower left of the star. And I write, that I am surprised at the circular structure. The star seems displaced relative to the center of the material. This phrase is almost exactly what I would write in an email 9 years into my future. Let's take a look at the drawing of 1995 next to the Hubble discovery of 2004. It's not only the existence of the offset and its direction that matches. I've also drawn the tilt of the ellipse at the same angle as the discovery image. The ellipse aspect ratio is nearly identical. And a specific detail is that the lower part of the ellipse is drawn in 1995 with a very strong line that is absent on the upper part. And indeed, the discovery shows that Fomalhaut's comet belt is brighter along its lower side compared to its upper side. So all of these four things actually match between 1995 and 2004. But let's take a skeptical approach. Chance would be possible if I sketch astronomical discoveries every night and make very many astronomical discoveries during my career. Yet chance is highly unlikely because I rarely dream of astronomical discoveries and I rarely sketch them, and I don't make a huge number of discoveries. In fact, I was fortunate that in my career I made just one discovery, such as that with Fomalhaut. How about anticipation? Now, this is an important thing to consider. Given the existing knowledge of astronomy, in 1995, was it possible for an astronomer such as myself to anticipate the discovery? Well, what I can tell you is that in 1995, there was only one picture of a comet belt around a star, and it was this one to the lower right. And the star is called Beta Pictoris, and the photo, which I took with a telescope in Hawaii, shows that the dust around the star blocked, where the star is blocked by this black circle, the dust has this flame-like nebulosity coming out to either side of the star. And this clearly does not look like an elliptical ring. In 1995, there simply were no observations in existence of an elliptical comet belt around any star. Moreover, human knowledge did not contain a theoretical prediction of a comet belt that could have an offset from the star. And indeed, the first time such a theory was proposed was in 1999, 4 years after my dream log entry. And so anticipation, I think, is highly unlikely. So my conclusion is that this sketch and the subsequent astronomical discovery is scientific evidence for precognition. I examined the alternate explanations and they do not work. And notice how I choose to use the word nature at the top of my slide here. My position is that precognitive dreams do not belong in the category of the paranormal or psychic phenomena. Instead, they arise from a natural phenomena that will eventually be quantified and understood, much like other mysterious phenomena in the natural world. I've had several other influential precognitive dreams, and I'll mention two of them. The first happened when I was in school, and it's called the Trifid poster dream. In this dream, I had a dream of an unpleasant event concerning this ripped poster. I recognized that the event was about to happen in real life, and I changed my behavior so that the event never happened. The second precognitive dream that was influential happened a few years ago, and I call it the Heidelberg dream. In this case, I had a dream of having dinner with my colleagues in Heidelberg, but I arrived at the meeting point much too late to join them, and essentially I was lost. I could not find them. Yet I recalled a dream of where they would be, and I walked straight to their restaurant where I found them. And even though that restaurant that they had chosen was highly unusual and out of the way. What did the Trifid poster dream teach me? This experience of changing events taught me that the future is not predestined. We have free will. If a choice is available, we have a chance to change an outcome if you can remember your precognitive dreams. However, notice that I still have a memory of the unpleasant events happening to me. This is a series of events that never happened in my current timeline, but I perceive them from a different timeline. So I call these counterfactual events. These are the events that occur in a timeline that a person will not live through, but the person has perceived them through dreams. What's really amazing is that even though these events did not happen to me, they still exist in my memories, and therefore they're a part of my identity. Classically, you would say that your identity right now is shaped from your memories of past experiences. But if you have precognitive dreams, your identity right now has a component that is shaped by future events, some of which you might change because we have free will. The Heidelberg dream taught me that the opposite is possible. On the one hand, you want precognition to avoid problems, yet by the same token, a precognitive dream can help you reach a goal that would be impossible to reach otherwise. Importantly, this dream was specifically about navigation choices in order to return to my social group and food. So I believe it shows how precognition nurtures the instincts that we observe in the animal kingdom. Instincts evolved through natural selection, and I therefore think that humans and animals alike may have developed this trait naturally over millions of years. There are a few more characteristics I'll summarize here. First, the experience of precognition is of an event that occurs in my lifetime, even if it's a story someone else tells me about their life. So it's autobiographical. Second, most déjà rêvé is about a novel learning experience, even if it seems relatively unimportant. So my hypothesis is that the Anirophobia phenomena emerges from the biochemistry of learning. Third, déjà rêvé only comprises 1 to 10 seconds of an experience. This is so short that I think it is a major reason behind the fourth major point, which is that precognitive dreaming is generally useless for predicting the future. The reason precognitive dreams are generally useless has to do with the principles of memory and the nature of knowledge. Psychologists divide memory into implicit memories that manifest unconsciously, like riding a bicycle, and explicit memories where you consciously recall something. Explicit memories has two parts. The first part is what you remember as if you were a video camera recording sights and sounds, and that's called episodic memory. The second part is the meaning that you are able to attach to that video recording in your brain, and that's called semantic memory. So here is the problem. When you view your future in a dream, the semantic memory that is available comes from your past, not from your future. Therefore, experiences of the future create highly incomplete and erroneous knowledge. For example, in the Jungle Book, the panther Bagheera has seen fire in the village, something that's red and moving upwards, but attaches this episodic memory to the semantic knowledge of flowers, which also can be bright and grow upward. So Bagheera tells Mowgli to find the red flower, which is incorrect. But that was the best that Bagheera could do given his semantic knowledge. And so too, the human mind will attach incorrect semantic information to the episodic component of experiencing the future. The solution is to figure out how to record episodic memories faithfully, without the semantic interpretations that each individual gives to the experience. I think you can roughly separate the content of your dreams into 3 categories, A, B, and C, where the A and B categories are the memories of real events and also imagined events. The C category has that tiny bit of episodic information from a future event. What we could do is assemble a group of people who will have the same experience in the future. The episodic component of memory will be similar among these individuals. In the present day, we can record or observe their dreams with everything being stored and analyzed in something that I've called the dream net by analogy to the internet, which contains huge quantities of information. By analyzing the dream net data, each individual will have a unique A and B content, but the group as a whole will have in common the tiny bit of C information, and this can be distilled from all the other content in the DreamNet. The DreamNet could be created in our near future, but another goal is to figure out how the phenomena happens. And the question that I've posed is, what is the neural correlate of precognition? And my answer is probably the hippocampus, which is one of the most important parts of our brain for processing memories, also for learning new experiences, and as well as our sense of space, place, and time. So what experiments are possible? My research suggests that novel and surprising learning events are very prominent in precognitive experience. So what is a neural correlate for novelty? When you experience something new, what happens in your brain that is unique? So here I'm taking our perception of space. The hippocampal formation has cells called grid cells that fire as we explore space. This map shows a room with a door to the left and a table and a bathroom. A single grid cell in our brain will map this space by firing or becoming active only at the locations with the yellow dots. Everywhere else, the cell is inactive. This regular grid allows us to navigate through space. I've called this room a familiar room because it's a room that a person has visited in their past. In a familiar room, the grid has a regular symmetric pattern as shown in my illustration here. But what happens to the grid if the room is a novel room? The person is entering it for the first time. The grid becomes distorted, as shown here, but after walking around the room a bit, the place will become familiar and the grid will eventually become organized. So what neuroscientists have discovered is a neural correlate for a novel space. This helps the study of precognitive dreams because it provides a testable hypothesis. If you have dreamed of this room, before the experimenter takes you to it for the first time, the grid spacing will be regular. The researcher doing the experiment will be astonished because they are certain you have never ever entered this room before. Yet the brain activity will show that you are familiar with this room. So this is an experiment where a neuroscientist could see for themselves that your brain has already been to the room, that you have witnessed the future before the experiment created it for you. Another important avenue for future research is to improve techniques for dream recording. What we know is that a person's brain will show a specific pattern of activity when the person has a specific experience. Each experience produces a unique electrical and blood flow pattern in your brain. An important research finding is that this pattern is similar during the perception of a real thing, remembering that thing, and even imagining that thing. So in principle, a neuroscientist can monitor your brain activity and tell you what you are seeing in your imagination or while dreaming. These animations were part of a research study where a person's brain activity was monitored while dreaming, and the neuroscientists observed that the dream on the left was about reading a book, while the dream on the right concerned looking at a woman. But here is the amazing thing. If other people are decoding your neural imagery while you are dreaming, and if you are having a precognitive dream, this allows other people to see what you see in the future. Your dreams are directly showing future events in the present time. We can even take this another step further. Imagine that you have a precognitive dream about a face, such as this one on the right, but you don't recognize the face because it's a new person that you haven't met yet. They are from your future. But what if in the future, facial recognition has stored everyone's face? The DreamNet could take the face that you just dreamed about and give you certain details about this person. So what if the person that you've seen from your future is your new boss? Your new boss would work in a certain type of profession, and hence the face in your dream is also telling you what your future career might be. So with this single example, you could see how valuable it could be if the DreamNet would be able to recognize a single face from your future. On a much larger scale, the DreamNet will be able to process thousands of dreams from thousands of neuronauts, and then find the common elements, which could be a single important thing from our collective future. What if from the thousands of people participating in the DreamNet, these 12 all have the same dream about a BBC News headline showing an air disaster in Africa? The DreamNet would have records of all headlines and all air disasters that have happened in the past, and would be able to determine that this particular air disaster dreamt by the 12 neuronauts did not happen in the past. Instead, they experienced a news headline from the future. This is how the DreamNet could be used to avert disasters and minimize the loss of life. In summary, my main goal was to describe the evidence that convinced me that precognitive dreams are real information time travel and not an illusion, particularly because of the Fomalhaut dream and the unique astronomical discovery that followed 9 years later in my life. I contemplated these alternate explanations and argued that they don't work. One of the most important things a scientist can do is to offer testable predictions. So I described the neural correlates of novel versus familiar space. If you are experiencing a novel space that you have previously dreamt about, that neural grid that helps you navigate should be regular, as if you had entered the space before instead of irregular. Finally, I explained why precognitive dreams give faulty and unreliable information when a single individual is involved. The solution is to assemble a large sample of precognitive dreamers who have shared future experiences so that we can separate the subjective from the objective, and this will give cleaner information about future events. Presently, humans have learned to engineer space, but I think in the future, we will engineer time as well, having a huge impact on science and society. My story, I hope, will have convinced you that precognitive dreams may not be an illusion of the mind. And if so, there are some major implications. First, your consciousness and personal identity do not depend on only your present and your past, but they are also influenced to a small degree by the future events you experience in precognitive dreams. Precognitive dreams are also important for giving people a sense of intuition and purpose, and I think this applies to the instincts of the animal kingdom. And finally, you can say that the purpose or consequence of sleep and dreaming is to nurture all of the above. Thank you very much. If you'd like more information or have any questions, feel free to email me, callis@berkeley.edu. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I am Rinaldo Perri. I work as assistant professor in neuropsychology at University Cusano of Rome, and I'm a psychotherapist as well. The talk I'm going to present you was funded by the Bial Foundation, and it's an electrophysiological study about the role of hypnosis in the cognitive conflict resolution. In particular, it's entitled "Hypnotic Suggestions May Reduce the Conflict Between the Automatic and the Intentional Processes. Behavioral and Neurophysiological Evidence from the Stroop Task." Compelling literature has suggested the possibility of reducing automating cognitive processes through hypnotic suggestions. In particular, the group of rats and colleagues first showed that hypnotic suggestions to see words as meaningless symbols can reduce or even eliminate the Stroop effect in individuals with high responsiveness to hypnosis. The Stroop effect would be the slow speed and low accuracy in naming the in color of an incongruent color word. And here on the right, you can look at the typical Stroop stimuli. The Stroop task is to indicate the ink color. In other words, the subject has to suppress the automatic word reading and pay attention only to the ink color. Most of previous studies in this field focused only on the behavioral data, while only a few investigations reported also neurophysiological data. In particular, Casiglia and colleagues observed that the post-hypnotic suggestion of inability to read removed the incongruency effect on the N400 component. Of course, we're talking about an even-related potentials study. Also, Zahedi and colleagues adopted a similar paradigm and proposed a semantic locus of the effect and enhanced executive control associated with the increased frontal N1. Again, we're talking about an ERP study. At the opposite, Rads and colleagues combined the EEG and neuroimaging data, and they observed that post-hypnotic suggestion to see Stroop words as nonsense strings decreased activity in the cuneus and the anterior cingulate cortex, pointing at hypnotic alterations at the level of visual processing other than conflict resolution. While Egner and colleagues at the opposite observed an increase of ACC activity for eyes when compared to lows, that is, individuals with low responsiveness to hypnosis, as well as a decrease in functional connectivity between frontal and left frontal lateral sides. The authors interpreted these findings in terms of a functional dissociation of conflict monitoring and cognitive control processes in eyes. The current debate on the neurophysiological mechanisms affected by hypnotic suggestions in the Stroop task is hindered by several methodological limitations, including the scarce number of participants and EEG electrodes for EEG studies, of course, the administration of different types of hypnotic suggestions, such as reading words as meaningless, inability to read, perceptual alterations, and the recruitment of highs only. The individuals with a high responsiveness to hypnosis are a minority of the general population, so they represent a sort of special sample. As a consequence, the reliability and generalizability of previous findings are rather weak. In the present study, we aimed to target different stages of reading processes by adopting a within subject design instead of a between, and providing two different hypnotic suggestions that might affect the sensory processing and the semantic integration as reflected by the perceptual and the semantic suggestion respectively. Also, we aimed to record the even-related potentials activity from distributed brain areas and in both the pre-stimulus and post-stimulus stages of processing. That is what is called proactive and reactive stage of processing respectively. Also, we administered suggestions during alert hypnosis instead of post-hypnotic suggestions, and we recruited participants regardless of their responsiveness to hypnosis. Our hypothesis is that the behavioral performance on the Stroop task may benefit from both hypnotic suggestions to the same extent, and that different neurophysiological mechanisms should emerge for each of the adopted suggestions. 17 volunteers participated in the study, and the sample's hypnotic susceptibility score, as defined by the Harvard Group Scale, was 7.1, indicating a moderate hypnotic susceptibility. As for the task, we adopted a classical manual Stroop task with word stimuli of 3 categories: congruent, incongruent, and neutral, and more than 3 200 stimuli were provided. So the procedure consisted of 3 sessions. In the first session, the Harvard scale was administered, while during the second and the third sessions, the EEG activity was recorded while subjects performed the Stroop task. During the second and the third sessions, participants performed the Stroop task in both the control and the alert hypnosis conditions. In the hypnosis condition, the perceptual or the semantic suggestion were provided. Here is an excerpt of the 2 suggestions. As for the perceptual one, I suggested participants that your gaze will be captured by the central letter of each word, while any other letter of the word will be farther away from the central letter. As for the semantic suggestion, I say that visual words will be characters of a foreign language that you do not know, and you will not attempt to attribute any meaning to them, being able to press the button corresponding to the ink color. The EEG activity was recorded through 32 scalp electrodes, and 2 different segmentations were adopted for the ERP analysis. In particular, one segmentation was for the analysis of the pre-stimulus stage of processing, the other for the post-stimulus stage. Also, we performed the source imaging analysis through the minimum norm method. And as for the behavioral data, we considered the response time, the percentage of errors, as well as the main effects of the Stroop task, that is the facilitation effect, the interference, and the inhibition effect. So let's talk about behavioral results. Analysis of the reaction time showed only a significant main effect of category, confirming the well-known increase in reaction time for incongruent trials, while analysis on errors showed a significant effect of condition, indicating an increase of accuracy during hypnosis compared to control. And this effect was comparable for semantic and perceptual suggestion. At the opposite, no significant effects emerged for condition, neither for the reaction time nor for the Stroop effects. The ERP results in the pre-stimulus stage of processing. This figure shows pre-stimulus differential ERPs derived from the hypnosis condition minus the control condition for the 2 types of suggestions. This comparison indicated that the prefrontal negativity component, the PN, was modulated by hypnosis. In particular, the perceptual suggestion enhanced the PN activity over the bilateral prefrontal sides, that is the F7 and F8 sides, whereas the semantic suggestion suppressed the PN activity on the in the left hemisphere with a slight increase over the right hemisphere. ERP results in the post-stimulus stage of processing. So this figure shows the post-stimulus ERPs in all conditions, suggestions, and categories. I will present the main components, ERP components, in chronological order of presentation. So we have the P1 component at occipital sites. This was not affected by any of the experimental manipulations. While the PN1 component peaking at 120 milliseconds over the anterior side, this was associated with the process of perceptual awareness from the anterior insula. And in this study, the PN1 was increased during hypnosis regardless of the suggestion type and Stroop category. As for the visual N1 component, this emerged at 160 milliseconds at occipital sites. Analysis reported reduced activity during hypnosis regardless of suggestion or Stroop category. And as for the P180, this is a left distributed positive potential over the frontal lobe. This activity was suppressed by the semantic suggestion. As for the late positive potential, this is a slow component and only a main effect of category emerged, indicating largest amplitude for the incongruent stimuli as expected. Neuroelectric source imaging. We performed this analysis in order to obtain more information about the functional role and anatomical source of the P180, which is a little known component. The minimum norm approach detected two main spots of activity in the superior and the middle temporal lobe, with a peak of activity at 180 milliseconds. So this analysis confirmed that P180 was generated in the left temporal lobe and that this was recruited less in semantic hypnosis, as you can see over here in the yellow line. At the opposite, this activity, the temporal lobe activity, was comparable across control and hypnosis condition with perceptual suggestion. So, summing up, we observed reduced errors on the Stroop task during the hypnosis. The effect was similar across the subsamples of mediums and highs, suggesting the potential benefit of hypnosis on response accuracy regardless of hypnotizability level. As for the brain activity, we observed both common and specific neurophysiological mechanisms for the few hypnotic suggestions. In particular, the perceptual suggestion engaged more executive control of the prefrontal cortex during the preparation stage, that is, the increase of PN component in the pre-stimulus stage of processing. At the opposite, the semantic suggestion affected the graphemic analysis of the words by deactivating the left temporal cortex activity, that is the P180 component. And both perceptual and semantic suggestions favored an increase in sensory awareness from the anterior insula, the large PN1 component, together with a reduction in discriminative attention from the occipital cortex. That is the reduced N1 component. So in other words, recent findings suggest that hypnotic suggestions acted through common and specific top-down modulations of perceptual and cognitive processes. We may conclude that hypnosis did not suppress reading, but acts by favoring or inhibiting specific presemantic stages of stimulus processing, which allowed more accurate performance. Further, and this is very important, the present findings might be considered potentially representative of the general population, given that we included both highs and mediums, while at the opposite, most studies of experimental hypnosis unfortunately used to exclude mediums. I really thank you for your kind attention to my presentation, and sorry for my English, I know it is not perfect. Anyway, I hope you found the study of hypnotic neurophysiology interesting, and if you like to keep in touch with me, or if you are looking for collaborations, please email me at this address. Have a great day and enjoy the conference.
Hello, my name is Katherine Mohr. I completed the thesis upon which this presentation is based at Saybrook University, where I received my master's degree. Currently, I'm a PhD student at the California Institute of Integral Studies, where I study consciousness, dreams and dreaming, synchronicity, chaos, and the holographic paradigm. I'm presenting today my Holo-net model of dreams and dreaming. In this presentation, I am referring only to the dream experience in humans and not non-human animals, just to be clear. In my study of dreams and dreaming, I became dissatisfied with shortcomings in the foundations of most studies, particularly in the mechanistic understanding of the dreamer and the upward causation view of dream processes. I felt that properly locating the dreamer within a quantum universe better addressed the whole person. Taken together, Bohm and Pribram's holographic notions of the universe and the human brain, respectively, offer a more rational and workable structure for dreaming. The Holo-net model is based on the connectionist net theory and extends the connectionist nets into Bohm's Holo movement. Now, regarding Bohm's holographic model, I want to say that as I'm presenting it, it's very simplified for the ease of comprehension in a short amount of time. The illustration you're now seeing shows only the foundational orders of Bohm's model, and that the elements herein are parts of one plenum, a single constant energy, and not actually individual separate parts. Though there may be other layers or orders corresponding to as yet undiscovered physical laws, and Bohm admitted that we cannot know how many orders there may be, those we can reasonably theorize about are listed here. Bohm's holographic model states, essentially, that the universe has a structure like that of a hologram. All that the universe encompasses, including past, present, and potentially future objects and events, the perceptible and the imperceptible, are part of a hologram. But each individual fragment or manifestation contains within it an image of the whole. The foundational parts of his model are the implicate order, which contains enfolded, hidden, as yet unmanifest waves of possibility for everything in the universe. It is a self-organizing system. It also contains the laws or patterns of behavior governing the things contained within it. There's the explicate order. It contains the perceivable, the manifested, unfolded objects of the world, our everyday reality, the particle-like manifestation comprising our everyday worlds. The Holo movement, which itself is not an order, it's the endless unfolding and enfolding of limitless possibilities. It's the interaction of the implicate and the explicate. The Holo movement appears to be a living, limitless, active plenum of waves of possibility or potentiality. We experience stable patterns, but these are brought about by constant enfolding and unfolding of information. Finally, there's the super implicate or super quantum. It's also known as the second implicate order. It is the source of the first implicate and its organizing and creative force. More about these will be said as we go along. Now, Pribram felt that a holographic model best explained neuropsychological phenomena of the brain, such as the points listed above. These were some things that he was interested in his study of the brains. Its enormous storage capacity, distributed memory storage, non-local memory retrieval, sensory imaging capability, projection of images, and some instances of associative recall. Thus, Pribram found that certain cerebral functions seem to operate by holographic principles. Essentially, and this is extremely simplified again, electrical impulses radiating out from the brain create crisscrossing interference patterns. He called the areas of interference where superposition interaction occurs eddies. From his studies, he surmised that there must be a nearly endless display of interference patterns. They must be the source of the human brain's holographic characteristics, and one's experiences of the self and the world is according to the haze of the eddies patterns. Bohm also believed that we are blurs of interference patterns enfolded throughout the hologram. The human brain thus may be seen as a sub-whole of the implicate. It is a whole implicate of itself, but it is also enfolded within the universal, or as Bohm called it, the original implicate order. It's an implicate within the implicate. Enfolding and unfolding, it is enfolding and unfolding our everyday experiences. Events in the implicate order also happen immediately within the brain because the two are entangled. They're inseparable. And throughout this talk, you'll realize there's a whole lot more that could be said about each and every one of these points, but in the time given, I really am forced to simplify. Okay, so the connectionist net theory of dreaming. It is a theory that is that takes as its core belief that dream imagery is formed due to firings of units of information in the brain during sleep. The strength of the connection between units determines the probability of information appearing in one's dreams, with the most familiar material having the strongest connections. The connecting units are denser in places where material has been overpracticed or frequently used and therefore more strongly associated. Nets fire in mostly linear fashion during waking thought, a feed-forward process, engaging connected thoughts within the net for further connection. So in dreaming, units are more broadly connected, less linear. This is more relaxed. It's an auto-associative process and explains how familiar material becomes woven in a bizarre way in dreams. The day's experiences are also often included in dreams, in part because they're being digested for the day, but also in part because those connections are fresher, more familiar, and therefore more stronger for the night. And now, connectionist net model is fine, but it doesn't really go far enough, I believe. So, my Holo-net model. The Holo-net model that I'm presenting differs from connectionist net theory in three essential ways. The network of available imagery extends into the holo movement. I do not believe that the human, what seems to be individual consciousness, exists in a vacuum. The brain does not exist within a vacuum. There's a wider quantum realm in which we are all situated. The holo movement honors that. Dream images are highly individual. I'll discuss this quite a lot more in a minute. And two-way communication exists between the implicate of the dreamer's brain and the original implicate, the universal implicate. Again, the inseparability is the explanation for that, then quantum entanglement. Now, note that there is really no real separation between what is considered personal or individual consciousness and universal consciousness, except by degrees. I only separate them here for exploration. So there are several key points to the Holo-net model. The universe and everything in it lies within the implicate order as waves of potentiality. The human brain itself is a sub-whole of the implicate, and implicate within the implicate. The super implicate or super quantum order is the energetic force behind and working through the hollow movement, radiating energy continuously, as energy must, via the structure of the hollow movement. The brain acts as a receiver and a transmitter of energetic pulsations like those radiating from the superquantum. Connectionist nets of information units extend into the implicate and are formed by the action of the hollow movement. The Holo-net model is based on my understanding of the energy of the superimplicate, acting via the structure of the hollow movement, behaving in such a way as to bring the endless possibilities of the implicate order to the dreamer and unfolds those images that are most immediately relevant to them. Placed within the holographic framework, dreams and their often archetypal symbols, even synchronistic events in life, can be seen as intimately personal themes or metaphors, aiding evolution of our personal consciousness and bringing about clearer connection with the information of the implicate order. Further, continuing on with the key points, the Holo-net model, dream content is not random. Indeed, it is attracted to the individual dreamer. Expanding connectionist nets into the hollow movement creates a logical model that addresses both contemporary scientific findings and the phenomenological experiences of the dreamer. The hollow movement is the universal process we may think of as creation. I could say a whole lot more about that. Maybe I'll see you again for a longer talk. Implications of this model suitably address many phenomena generally considered to be anomalous in dream studies. And clearly, this is a downward causation model. Rather than the physiology or psychology of the dreamer being the foundation of the dream experience, I posit the following. The dreaming human brain receives pulsating energy from the superimplicate, and that operates via the structure of the hollow movement, the interaction between implicate and explicate, and radiating the energy potentialities of all past, present, and possible future things, because they are contained within the implicate, and because that implicate is entangled with the implicate of one's brain. Now, this process excites units of information within the connectionist net, attracting relevant dream imagery and metaphors, both from the implicate and the universal implicate order, and from the most familiar, most practiced, or sometimes newest information within the implicate of the dreamer's brain. I could not get all that into a graphic, and I know it's quite a lot to take in. Let's talk about the extending the net and what the wider implications are. Extending connectionist nets into the hollow movement explains access to archetypal dream imagery. This is imagery that appears in dreams across cultures, across time. They cannot be images that exist in the individual brain. And so transpersonal explanation is really required. Expanding the nets also explains the personal nature of many dreams, attracted dream imagery, and a lot of times this happens due to life circumstances. A lot of studies have been done on PTSD in dreaming and divorce, for example, or acute illness in dreaming. And these types of dreams continue to bring out, with the continuity principle, continue to bring about, and repetition principle, bring about the same images until the matter at hand is dealt with, until there is some sort of release or a new understanding of one's situation. Then the imagery starts to change up a little bit. We see this over time when people are receiving therapeutic care. Expanding the net also explains the random or bizarre nature of some dreams, the propensity for dreams to benefit the dreamer or lead us in a more moral direction, and anomalous, non-ordinary dreaming. So the extended connectionist nets account for several things. Dream imagery. Dream images need not be stored in the brain. They exist within the implicate and are transmitted by the action of the holo movement. The implicate of the holographic brain receives energetic impulses and transmits imagery then to the dreamer. The dreaming brain then unfolds the relevant imagery. Layers of symbols and information in dreams, like the layers of imagery in a hologram, provide environmental, global, and personal levels of dream content in addition to others. Now, holograms can contain many hundreds of times more information than images alone, any other kind of standard images. So it's interesting that this plays out in the dream realm. And you can read Ullman. Quite a lot of Ullman's work talks about this, and also Taylor. It's also interesting to note the self-organizing power of the holo movement. The implicate order contains everything, every potential manifestation, the hidden or yet unmanifested potentiality, but also, and this is critical again, as Bohm wrote in 1987, quote, the principles determining which of these shall become actual. So it's not just that the images exist, but which of these images will be unfolded into the explicate order of our existence or of our dream state lies within the power of the holo movement. And now, if the human brain is a sub-whole of the hologram of the universe, this potentiality lies within the dreamer's brain as well. I think we have a lot of study to do on this topic. I'm hoping to be part of that. It also seems that both waking experiences and the dream symbols work together to lead the dreamer gently along on her journey, with the aid of the holo movement pulsating the energy of solutions to all of her perceived problems. And therefore, synchronicity also becomes less challenging to explain. Studies have found that dreams do actually have a moral message to them. And this makes sense because the energy of the problem will be enfolded within the implicate, but then so must the solution or possible solutions. Extending the nets also makes bizarre dream imagery seem not quite so bizarre. Auto-associative processing links imaging from waking experience or memories with metaphorical themes and universal archetypes. So far-fetched situations or imagery only really seem so because all metaphors are attracted specifically for the dreamer. And a lot of Taylor's work is very interesting here in dream appreciation. His method of coming to kind of allow the dreamer to understand the meaning within his or her own dreams shows the many layers. There's a layer of your body. Your body knows things that you may not know about it. There are unresolved issues in the mind that want to come up in dreams and will lend their imagery to the dream experience. And also universal global messages as well are enfolded in metaphors that are attracted by this the individual dreamer's implicate and enfolded within them in a way that weaves one story for that person. Now, the implicate within the implicate. Again, the attraction of personally relevant imagery and moral guidance in dreams suggests an intelligent and self-organizing universal force is at work. That's that super quantum, that power behind and through the holo movement. Extending the nets also explains anomalies, explains the inexplicable. Connection between the implicate of the dreamer's brain and the universal implicate order is instantaneous since they are entangled. Hence, the dreaming brain receiving the pulsations of the super implicate through the hologram through the Holo movement, because energy is forever in motion, immediately unfolds information that excites units within their own nets. So many anomalies, such as telepathy, lucid dreaming, precognitive dreams, and others, may be explained in this way by this model. I apologize for rushing through this. This is my elevator speech. I thank you for your kind attention. My contact information should be showing right now. The abstract and references for this thesis can be found on myacademia.edu and ResearchGate pages, and the thesis itself is available on ProQuest. Thank you again. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Hello. This research is about promoting self-disclosure, so important in clinical settings in psychology, by means of unconscious or non-conscious priming. And the question is it indeed non-conscious? And what is the role of consciousness in this priming? This research was done in collaboration with postgraduate student Ryan Coleman at the University of Louisville in Kentucky. I'm Tom Wilson, experimental psychologist who taught and did research for over 30 years in the United States, and now I've been appointed senior lecturer in psychology at De Montfort University in Leicester in the UK. My career has focused on critical research on implicit cognitions in a variety of domains, and also analytic methods of assessing awareness of supposed implicit cognition. Now, the question of consciousness and mental activity has been of interest since the dawn of questions about psychology. It's of continuing interest still today because we need to understand our minds and what is conscious and what is not. Is it in fact the case that there are many aspects of ourselves and our self-knowledge that we are completely unaware of? There's also an empirical posture, a question of unconscious or non-conscious processes that ultimately are activities in the brain. Many societies and journals have come about, including the science of consciousness, showing this continuing interest. Again, the question is, what is conscious and what is not in our mental activities? This also asks the question, what is the place of mental representation in our psychology? Also, questions of behavioral control. Often it is said that the conscious mind is, of course, epiphenomenal and sort of a reflection of what is actually going on in the real work. And so the question of whether there is conscious agency, if consciousness can indeed cause behavior as much as reflect behavior. And finally, there's an enduring interest in showing value in unconscious processing and unconscious entities, going all the way back to Freud. Indeed, this is an enduring question. For example, Freud said, we become obliged then to take up the position that it is both untenable and presumptuous to claim that whatever goes on in the mind must be known to consciousness. The alternative to this debate, of course, in academic psychology, William James, quote, "The unconscious is the sovereign means of believing whatever one likes in psychology and of turning what might become a science into a tumbling ground for whimsies." And so therefore, this debate is as old as psychology itself. There are enduring postures about consciousness and mental activity, to summarize before getting into the research. For example, often it is assumed that there are separate conscious and unconscious systems within the dual processing framework of cognitive activity. Also, research has shown that awareness seems to be temporally subsequent to the brain activity that makes it happen. Conscious acts are often considered not exclusive to what humans do, and so people in strong AI attempt to show non-human systems can also do conscious action. There is interest in research on cognitions that defy the conscious as explanatory. And so the purpose of the research is to show that the explanation is often in the unconscious or non-conscious activity in the mind. Often people argue that there is no good way to research consciousness because they don't seem to know how to assess conscious awareness. And there's an enduring paranoia regarding scientific inquiry into consciousness. The standard architecture is of separate systems, the dual process meta theory, in which we have separately explicit cognitions and implicit cognitions. Obviously, explicit cognition is conscious, while implicit cognition has often been considered the unconscious side of our minds, or in more recent times, this is labeled non-conscious, to emphasize that processes are not something that one could be aware of in the first place. Explicit cognition, of course, is characterized as serial and slow, it's deliberative, it is effortful, and requires cognitive resources. While implicit cognitions run parallel, they are associative and fast, and they are effortless, using no cognitive resources. Also within the literature of implicit memory and also attention and working memory, we see that there are these differences between the two processes in the dual process model. So the standard dual process model is a meta theory within which we think about our theories of cognition. It has separate conscious and non-conscious systems, assuming that if information or knowledge is in awareness and can be stated, it is explicit. Anything that takes place outside of our awareness is labeled implicit cognition. Both systems, though, are assumed to be mental, and therefore there would be explicit mental representations that are conscious, but yet also there are mental representations of an implicit nature of which we are not aware. It often happens because there is a non-analytic approach to awareness assessment in the literature. In other words, we often use post-experimental questions that require participants to be theorists themselves. More about that in a moment. And so therefore we have separate systems, a non-conscious process system and a conscious process system, the conscious explicit and the non-conscious is implicit cognition. So our question is this promotive self-disclosure priming really non-conscious? Or could participants, and of course clients, the therapists, actually be aware that they are being primed to self-disclose? Priming is of course assumed to be implicit, automatic, and unconscious by definition. Non-conscious activation of sort of behavior guiding implicit cognitions takes place, whether it's masked or associative or verbal priming, and it results in actions or judgments that change outside of our awareness. However, the research is typically concluding these unconscious effects because awareness was assessed non-analytically with post-experimental questions like, what was the study about? And do you have an idea what our hypothesis was? These kinds of open-ended questions ask the participant to be psychological theorists themselves, and yet we are the theorists. And so we suggest a more analytic approach to assessing consciousness using constrained reports and asking participants to be able to indicate things that they could know about and that could be conscious. Now, if priming is found to be conscious, it would be explicit cognition, and then by definition it would not be priming, but simply factors that lead to malleable behavior. But this does not preclude the prime's effect. It only questions the non-conscious nature of the processing. So imagine something's troubling you and you go see a professional psychologist about your problem. And in the first initial chat, you're asked questions within the chat that you might not really be fully paying attention to. You're just answering. Questions like, would you say you like talking to people? Or do you like to leave comments on social media? Are you the sort of person that likes to chat at parties? These sorts of questions, research has shown, lead to more self-disclosure about one's feelings than if you were asked these questions during the chat. Would you say you like to hold in your feelings? Do you sometimes go all day speaking to no one? Participants that receive these questions later tend to self-disclose significantly less than those with the previous questions. So this implicit verbal priming assumes that information is passively encoded, the information from such questions, or symbolized by a non-conscious recognition process. Then behavior is influenced by an unconscious representation of that given information. The conceptual information about self-disclosure is, of course, an unconscious representation because it's not available to awareness. Unconscious mental representation, therefore, is implicit. Individuals are not consciously aware of the aspects of the stimuli which lead them to their behavior, or that their behaviors even changed. This research that we performed follows on research by Greco and colleagues published in 2013 about priming self-disclosure using non-conscious means. These researchers used two tasks as the prime, a sentence scramble task like this, in which they were presented a series of lists of 5 words, and they were to put these words into a sentence. Note that participants in the self-disclosure condition were presented with words like opens and shared, whereas participants in a non-disclosure condition were presented with the same words, however substituted with words like closes and concealed. Another priming task that Greco and colleagues used was self-descriptive statement ratings, such as these. In other words, in the disclosure condition, individuals were to rate from 1 to 5 their agreement to statements like, I share my feelings with others. Sometimes I like discussing my problems. In the non-disclosure condition, participants were actually presented with statements to be agreed like this. Sometimes I like to hold in my feelings, or I tend to keep my problems to myself. After performing these tasks, participants were then asked to write 2 brief essays about themselves. And the dependent measures here were the number of personal qualities mentioned in the essay and the number of feelings mentioned in the essays. During the awareness assessment, Greco and colleagues asked participants during debriefing, do you know what the study was about? An open-ended question requiring participants to theorize about the study itself. Or, could you state any themes of the tasks? Again, an open-ended question asking participants to theorize. Finally, participants were asked, did you realize priming was the intention? And of course, no participants answered in the affirmative, and therefore the conclusion was that this priming that was promotive of self-disclosure was completely unconscious and outside of the participants' awareness. So the results, as we said, are that self-disclosure was promoted relative to the non-disclosure priming in the total word count of the essays, and also personal feelings were mentioned more often in the disclosure than the non-disclosure condition. And of course, none of the participants were aware or indicated awareness using their assessments of the priming intentions. Here's a quote from Greco et al. Individuals exposed to written materials priming the concept disclosure wrote longer essays with more statements about feelings compared to individuals primed with the concept non-disclosure. This effect occurred without conscious awareness of the participants, and none were able to identify the purpose of the study during the subsequent debriefing, end quote. And this is what we take issue with. Was it really without conscious awareness? And were the participants, even though they were unable to identify the purpose in open-ended questions, could a more analytic approach to assessing awareness show that they can, in fact, have awareness of the priming? So we revisited this non-conscious priming, and we improved on the previous design in 3 ways. First, we increased the sample size because, of course, we added a third condition in the design, a non-prime condition, so that we could test both the promotion and the inhibition of self-disclosure relative to the no-prime condition. And then we used, as I said before, an analytic awareness assessment based on the priming material itself. We assigned a validity score to disclosure-related conscious contents in accordance with the priming material. Here's how we did that. After the experiment, after the essays were written, we asked participants these more constrained reports than open-ended questions. For instance, from this list, could you circle those themes that seem to be part of the sentence scramble or the self-ratings? We asked participants to circle any and all words that seem to be related to the theme of those tasks. So, for example, a participant might have identified all 5 of the 20 words here that are about disclosing and being open about oneself. If participants were able to identify perhaps 3 of these, then the validity of their conscious contents with respect to disclosure-related material would be that they missed 2 of the 5 items, and so the validity was 90%. Another example would be an individual who might have circled some of the disclosing content items, but also other ones as well. Therefore, they missed 2, in this example, of the disclosing items and identified 3 that were unrelated. So they missed off 5, and so their validity score would be 75%. We found that there was indeed promotion of self-disclosure and that we were able to replicate Greco et al.'s findings. In addition, because we added the third condition, non-disclosure was found to be promoted relative to the no-prime condition. However, in our awareness assessment, we discovered that self-disclosure-related content significantly predicted the individual's priming effect. As you can see from this graph, the report validity of their conscious contents predicted very well the absolute difference in the number of mentions of feelings and personal qualities from the no-prime condition. Now, one question would be, are there biases in the study of non-conscious priming and other implicit cognitions as well, I might add, motivated by a standard ideology? In other words, researchers very much tend to use post-experimental and open-ended reports of awareness that don't really assess. There also tends to be a neglect in this literature of the disclosure-related contents in awareness. Previous research has failed to detect the evocative mental activity taking place during priming. There's also a claim that there is unconscious mental representation that must be guiding this behavior for it to be non-conscious. It sort of follows the higher order thought theory of conscious, that anything not reported from awareness must be non-conscious and implicit. So we propose a mentalistic approach. Could a more mentalistic attitude to implicit and explicit cognition be superior to the dominant dual process cognitive theory? Could a mentalistic approach give explanation to the priming of self-disclosure in particular? Our mentalistic view would be orthogonal to the separate systems assumption of dual process, in which the operations that take place are non-conscious because they are not something one could become conscious of. Therefore, explicit cognition would be deliberative operations, intentional, based on and operating on propositional contents and awareness. And on the other hand, implicit cognitions are more of an evocative or associative activational operation on conscious contents that are sub-propositional, such as a feeling of X or a recognition or sense of recognition of X. So the mentalistic view is also a meta-theory. And in our meta-theory, we suggest that all mental representation is conscious, that the role of consciousness is indeed to mentally represent the world to ourselves. There are non-conscious processes, but these can never be contents and awareness. And finally, mental episodes consist of the conscious contents and the non-conscious operations that tend to link them. For self-disclosure priming, non-conscious encoding must have activated conceptually related conscious contents, the validity of which we found predicted the prime's influence. Thank you for your attention to this talk and presentation of my research.
Hi there, I'm Rishit Das, and I'm going to be talking about my research project that I've done in conjunction with Juliana Castillo on how unconscious cognition influences emotion. Imagine that the laptop that's facing you isn't just a screen attached to a keyboard. Focus on the spatial and qualitative aspects of your visual experience. For instance, look at the rounded corners, or the gap between two keys, or perhaps the brightness of the screen. All these factors emerge when we give conscious focus and time to them. But what happens when this acknowledgement doesn't exist? What happens when focus and time is at an extreme low? Can you still recognize a laptop's a laptop if it's being flashed at you for a couple milliseconds, or perhaps if your focus is diverted? All these questions were what gave rise to our research framework, which we're going to talk about a bit later on.
All right, so this is just a little bit about us before we move on into our goals and content. I currently reside in Hong Kong, and I'm a rising junior in high school. My focus or area of interest is cognitive science, and in my free time, I like to go on hikes or listen to music. Juliana?
I'm a rising senior with an interest in everything learning related, particularly the philosophical groundwork of politics, the evolution of governments internationally, and classical viola.
All right, so our goals and content. This is basically split off into 4 different categories. And the first one, and the overarching one, is discussing what we think are required to build a new theory of unconscious emotion. We think this is primarily needed because currently conscious emotions and unconscious emotions work in a flux, but we don't exactly understand how. We have various models such as the two-factor theory or the Lazarus theory of emotion, which account for conscious emotions, but not necessarily unconscious ones. So those are the first 2 categories. The third one, and the most prevailing one, is our pilot study, in which we're going to discuss our use of ocular motor control, or eye tracking, our use of sentiment analysis to study subjective data before and after, showing our priming video and also our inferences from there. Lastly, we're going to talk about our future insights, in which we're going to maybe discuss a bit about our use of fMRI and some other things for solidifying this theory of unconscious emotion.
Unconscious cognition works at the lowest level of attentional capacity, so low that we feel we lack access to phenomenal representation or even awareness that the stimulus ever occurred. However, this isn't really the case. When a stimulus crosses the 7 ± 2 maximum for parallel processing, the unconscious mind is there to back up conscious processing to make sense of what we're looking at. When we look at implicit memory, it is often agreed that a subject can emotionally respond to a presently occurring event the same way it did to a past event without recalling what the past event was. It is especially interesting to test this independence from conscious recollection in subjects suffering from amnesia. This is because, unlike normal subjects, there is no possibility for explicit memory access. So, when the subject who has no access to phenomenal awareness, whether they're suffering from amnesia or not, is asked, "Why are you scared of the dark?" they can't recollect what caused this fear. They simply have it.
In the case of implicit perception, this very idea bridges in the sense that there's something called subliminal stimuli, which in short basically means a stimulus which is under the visual required threshold for conscious perception. Usually this threshold, at least in our case, is from 17 milliseconds to 108 milliseconds. And because of this duration, the stimuli doesn't reach our sensory memory either, as it exists below the 300 millisecond visual required threshold. So in short, because we can't retrieve our memory consciously, or we can't recall it consciously, we need to rely on our implicit memory due to this short duration of focus and time. So this sort of moves on and suggests that the mind unconsciously has to use assimilation to make sense of what the subliminal stimuli is trying to show, because again, we don't have sufficient time or focus to accommodate or learn what's being subliminally perceived. It's due to this that experiments often lead to a phenomena called free-floating emotions, which is basically the association between automatic processes and emotional response. It persists, especially when a stimuli is subliminal. All the values between the 17 to 108 millisecond range can be used to manipulate a subject to feel a certain way, or maybe even feel unsure how they're feeling, but their behavior says otherwise. This is because of the unconscious nature of these stimuli. So often in these experiments, there's something called a prime, which depicts a condition being tested. So this can be an emotion, it can be response time to a certain recognitional process. And this prime influences the perception of something called a target image. This target image is usually neutral by nature, but feels subjectively emotional because of the previous prime. So if the prime was sad, for example, maybe it's a sad image and the target's just a picture of something very neutral. To the subject, it feels sad because of the prime that occurred before it. That's the basic setup for how a subliminal priming experiment usually works. Alright, so this is our design framework for our experiment. We decided to go with something called response priming, which is a type of subliminal priming in which the prime and target are shown less than 100 milliseconds apart. Within response priming, there are usually consistent primes, which refer to when the prime and target depict the same condition. So this can be in terms of emotion, such as happy and happy, or it could be in terms of shapes as well, so square and square. That's a consistent prime, and it refers to faster response and also lower error rate. In contrast, there are also inconsistent primes, which refer to contrasting conditions, so happy and sad, or square and rectangle. This often leads to slower response and a higher error rates. We're going to return to these later on. Another term in response priming is SOA, or stimulus onset asynchrony. This basically refers to the time interval between the start of the prime showing and the start of the target showing. This range is what we mentioned before, the 17 to 108 milliseconds. So let's get started with the experiment. We downloaded 14 image triplets of 14 different video games. So in basic terms, that just means 3 different images of Mario Kart, 3 different images of Donkey Kong, etc. Out of this triplet, we chose 2 random images of the same video game, and we essentially posited them or positioned them at a randomly generated coordinate on a 1920 by 1080 screen. This was presented for 100 milliseconds. Then 25 milliseconds after, it was blank with just the fixation point, the blue diamond in the middle of the screen. And then we presented the target mask. Now, this is important because the target is a neutral image. And in our case, we decided to go with the remaining image from the triplet. The mask is very important because it reduces something called fixation. Fixation refers to when someone's eyes, for example, are at a certain coordinate, and by chance the target image also appears there, and they fixate on it for longer than they usually would have to, because their eyes take time to focus. When this occurs, the mask is especially useful because it reduces fixation and thus reduces the chance of conscious emergence or acknowledgement of that thing or condition. The last remaining steps of our experiment are perhaps the most crucial one because they reduce something called spatial confounds. We're going to get into what that is later on, but to give you a gist of it, if primes and targets are being shown constantly to be left, right, in a cyclical pattern, people sort of know where to look for. But if you switch coordinates every pair, it's completely random. And that's exactly what we did. So wherever x and x1 was and wherever m and y were, we would spatially switch them or switch their coordinates. And this happened for every alternate pair. Right after this, we cycle back to the process and randomize x and x1 again. Alright, so here you can see our prime, so that's League of Legends, Angry Birds, Donkey Kong, and then the second prime out of the triplet, so A2, B2, C2, the same video games, and the more important part is our target mask. So we took the last remaining image from the video game triplet and visually subtracted 2 random arrowheads from it using Photoshop and Microsoft Word. So you can see the effect on it on the right hand side and how that looked. This essentially reduces fixation because even if people fixate on the item, they don't know exactly what they're looking at until they keep asking themselves, what is it, subconsciously.
Our objective with this experiment is to form a theory of unconscious cognition through an examination of the relationship between unconscious triggers and conscious emotions. Our results show that subjects familiar with video games have higher confidence levels and increased emotional responses. To the right, you can see our hypotheses. H0, our base hypothesis, is that high-value experience, aka participants who have a lot of prior experience playing video games, correlates to stronger recognition systems even when stimuli are subliminal and masked. H1, our second hypothesis, is that even when subjects lack conscious understanding of what they're looking at, they experience emotion, such as happiness, anger, or nostalgia, because of unconscious assimilation. H3, our third hypothesis, is that backwards masking enables subjects to know what to look for, increasing their sentiment analysis and confidence levels.
Okay, the fun part, data. So what did we do? Well, we had a survey before the video and a survey after the video. The one before was simply, how are you feeling today? Just that. And after the video, we had a more in-depth survey, which was asking stuff like, how are you feeling after? Did this give any rise to specific memories? ... etc. The special thing about these surveys is they were completely subjective. We didn't have any scales or numbers or nominal values on them. So how do we get numbers? Well, we use natural language processing using sentiment analysis. Now, sentiment analysis is essentially you can say it's a type of computational linguistics using Python. Basically, it ranks words and sentences on a scale from -1 to +1. +1 being more positive in terms of whichever scale you're using. And there's two scales. There's polarity and there's subjective score. Subjective score isn't exactly what we want. It's more about the opinions and views, whereas polarity is about the emotion, which is what we want. So the output was basically that people who are familiar with video games, who reported they have played video games in the past, had a general increase in terms of emotion, whereas people who didn't know video games they either felt worse or pretty much the same after watching the video. That's depicted by positive 0.31 and negative 0.95. So with this, we have a little bit of evidence which suggests the null hypothesis, or H0, which is that a stimuli, even though it might be subliminal masks, there's this degree of experience that allows people to have a recognitional system still recognize the video game, even though it's under the visual threshold. Unconscious processing is accurate as long as you have solid experience with that area. Now we're going to move on to how that changed.
In our experiment, we used eye tracking technology to reinforce our results and to provide further insights into how participants interacted with our study. In this slide, we see data for one of our participants. In the small upper right-hand box, we see a heat map of the participant's gaze. This documents the areas the participant looked at over the course of the video. The small box to its left shows the participant's fixation, areas they looked at for a long time. The primary graph in the center of the screen shows a plot of all the locations where the participant looked over the course of the experiment. Fixation points, in other words, coordinates on the screen where the participant retained visual attention beyond the threshold of processing, are purple and boxed. On this slide, we have tabulated fixation points, the coordinates of the screen where the participant's vision fixated. Fixation duration, the amount of time the participant spent looking at those points. Spatially closest triplets, the masked images that most closely correspond to the locations where the participant fixated, and the participant's written response to a question asking what they saw in the video. As we can see, the participant fixated on 5 images long enough to consciously register and process them. However, in their introspective response, the participant only named one of the images, Mario. Especially notable and interesting is the fact that the participant recalled Mario, but not Donkey Kong. As you can see from the fixation duration column, the participant spent much more time looking at the Donkey Kong image than the Mario image. There are many options for why the participant did not recall the other images. Perhaps they did not pay enough attention to the visual stimuli to embed them in memory. Perhaps they could not perceive the image through the mask, etc.
So what does all this even mean? Well, the first thing is that when building a new theory of unconscious emotion, a mandatory variable or condition has to be that involuntary assimilation plays out. What this basically means is that because we don't have enough focus and time to perceive a stimulus properly or consciously, our unconscious mind has to use our long-term memories to make sense of what's being perceived subliminally. And this moves on to our second point, which is that when you don't have those long-term memories, when you have that degree of unfamiliarity, you can't assimilate and you can't give rise to the emotions attached to those long-term memories. So that's why subjects who are unfamiliar with it either felt no change or a decrease in emotion because they were confused. Thus, we propose, which is the third point, that physiological arousal, which is in every current conscious theory of emotion, shouldn't be there for unconscious theories of emotion because, as said before, the stimulus doesn't enter the conscious mind. You can't acknowledge what you're looking at. And the last part is getting to Freud, that the proposal that conscious and subconscious are strictly separated isn't really the case. It adds an extra dimension in the sense that they work in a flux very much. When you go past that 7 ± 2 threshold, it's the unconscious mind which has to make sense of what you're looking at using involuntary assimilation. Our precautions were linked to this great article called Do's and Don'ts in Response Priming Research by Philip Smith, Anne Haberkamp, and Thomas Schmidt, in which they sum up various different precautions you probably want to consider when doing response priming experiments. We've used 5 of these, and we're going to walk you through them pretty quickly. The first one is if you have variability, so if you have both inconsistent and consistent primes, or if you're changing any other condition, you should vary the SOA as well to study the time course of those different variables, essentially, or changes. In our case, we didn't have this. We just wanted to study how emotions emerge when subliminal stimuli are introduced and track eye movement. So we kept SOA consistent. The second one is you want to avoid the reversal effect. Now, this refers to when the tendency for consistent primes being better for response time and error rates and inconsistent primes being worse for response times and error rates, that tendency basically switches and leads to skewed results. But to combat that, we just have consistent primes, so there's no chance of switches. So we kept just consistent primes to avoid the reversal effect. The third one is that it's pretty simple. We didn't have any scales or anything which could constrict the answers people gave in terms of their pre-video and post-video survey. So we used natural language processing to get some scales and numbers. The fourth one is pretty important. When doing response priming, you want something called double dissociations, which basically fall into two categories. The first one is as SOA increases, so does the time the prime is shown for. And type B is when, if you think about it in terms of a distribution, the middle value, so wherever SOA is at a median length, that's where the visibility is lowest, and at the other ends it equally sort of increases. The second, you alter the strength of the prime, so if you basically change its brightness or contrast or some other visual value, it confounds those relationships and leads to skewed results. The last one is that we randomize the placement of all images. This is to avoid any spatial confound. So if let's say images were left, right, people would know where to look for and thus lead to fixation possibilities rising. So we basically try to get rid of that and use random values in terms of coordinates. So what does all this mean for the future? Well, the first thing is to understand accurately when someone is looking at what. Because we use the webcam tracker, our results weren't exactly as data-driven as we'd like it to be. So in the future, we're hoping to use a more expensive, a more accurate version of eye tracking, probably using some infrared tracker, and thus plotting more accurate data. The second thing is more psychological, which is to do with Freud's work. Now, Freud's work indicates that memories, particularly childhood ones, are deeply repressed or buried in the subconscious. And what we're seeing is that these subliminal stimuli may be able to trigger some of these subconscious memories and their associated emotions. The success of our study can add an interesting dimension to Freud's theory, indicating that this dichotomy between subconscious and conscious states may be more permeable than we think. Now, in terms of the current conscious theories of motion, the Schneider-Singer, James Lang, Cannon-Bard, this idea of physiological arousal or response is not necessary when we're talking about unconscious emotion. Our data has sort of cut out the ability to evaluate or have physiological responses, since the stimulus doesn't even enter a person's sensory memory, or let alone their awareness. So it bypasses half the process these current conscious theories of emotion describe. So this leaves a great room or a great amount of work for future research, in which we're sort of investigating if researchers can quote unquote implant new memories or images into previously lived experiences. And this can pose questions of logic or even eradicating cognitive biases to some sort of method maybe. And also, if our findings confirm that our hypothesis that images can actually affect mood and emotional state due to unconscious assimilation, people and researchers can harness this as a tool to increase well-being and perhaps change cognitive distortion or skewed perceptions of reality. Juliana and I would like to give our thanks to everyone that was able to host this conference, and also to all the viewers that stuck through till the end. We really had fun doing this, and if you have any questions, feel free to email either of us on the emails on screen. Thank you.